The Zephyrian Imperial Palace stretched across 3 mountain peaks, its crystalline spires piercing the crimson sky of Draconis Prime. Within its halls of polished obsidian, the most powerful being in the galaxy paced restlessly. Emperor Valthek the Magnificent, whose scales shimmered like liquid starlight and whose breath could melt battleships, had conquered 17 star systems. Yet today he felt utterly powerless. His youngest son, Prince Kyrian, lay motionless in the healing chambers. The boy's normally vibrant azure scales had faded to a sickly gray, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. For 3 rotations, the finest Zephyrian healers had examined the prince, their diagnostic crystals glowing as they probed for answers. Each conclusion was the same. They had never seen anything like this mysterious ailment. "The metabolic resonance is completely disrupted," muttered High Healer Nexus, her forearms gesturing helplessly at the readings. "His cellular structure is rejecting all our standard treatments. Without intervention, the prince will not survive another cycle." The Emperor's roar of anguish shattered the chamber's windows. His other children, all adults who commanded their own fleets, stood in uncomfortable silence. They had inherited their father's strength and pride, but none possessed the gentle nature that made young Kyrian so beloved throughout the Empire. The thought of losing his most innocent child drove Valthek to the edge of madness. In the servant quarters far below the palace's main levels, Sarah Chen was completing her evening rounds. As the sole human caretaker employed by the imperial household, she occupied a unique position. Most species in the galaxy viewed humans as unremarkable, neither the strongest, fastest, nor most intelligent race. They were tolerated rather than respected, often overlooked entirely in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Sarah had arrived on Draconis Prime 3 years earlier as part of a cultural exchange program. While her fellow humans had been assigned to administrative or research positions, she had requested work in childcare. The Zephyrians found this amusing rather than useful. But the Emperor's youngest son had taken an immediate liking to the strange, soft creature who told him stories about distant Earth. Unlike his siblings, Kyrian possessed an insatiable curiosity about other species. While other young Zephyrians learned to breathe fire and command respect through intimidation, Kyrian preferred to ask questions and listen to answers. His friendship with Sarah had scandalized the court initially, but even the Emperor had been forced to admit that the human's influence had made his son more thoughtful and compassionate. Sarah noticed the unusual stillness in the palace immediately. Normally, the corridors buzzed with activity, as servants, advisors, and courtiers went about their duties. Tonight, an oppressive quiet had settled over everything, broken only by distant sounds of distress from the upper levels. The few Zephyrians she encountered spoke in hushed tones, their usually proud bearing replaced by worried glances toward the healing chambers. When she reached the servants' common area, the gossip confirmed her fears. Prince Kyrian had fallen ill with something the healers couldn't identify or treat. The Emperor had forbidden anyone below the rank of High Counselor from approaching the healing chambers. Sarah's heart raced as she absorbed this information. The young prince wasn't just her charge. Over the years, he had become like a little brother to her. Unable to contain her concern, Sarah made her way through the palace's labyrinthine passages toward the healing chambers. She had memorized these routes during her years of service, including several maintenance corridors that the guards rarely monitored. Her small stature, which had once made her feel insignificant among the towering Zephyrians, now proved advantageous as she moved through spaces too cramped for the larger beings. As she approached the healing chambers, Sarah could hear the Emperor's anguished roars echoing through the stone corridors. The sound sent chills down her spine. She had never heard such raw pain from the being who commanded the respect and fear of countless worlds. Through a ventilation grate, she caught glimpses of the scene within. Kyrian's small form dwarfed by the massive healing apparatus, surrounded by his family and the most skilled medical professionals in the Empire. Sarah's mind raced as she observed the proceedings. The Zephyrian healers were using their traditional methods: crystal resonance therapy, plasma infusions, and molecular reconstruction chambers. These techniques were incredibly advanced and had served their species well for millennia. However, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching the problem from entirely the wrong angle. During her years caring for Kyrian, she had learned much about Zephyrian physiology. Their bodies were marvels of biological engineering, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space and processing energy directly from stellar radiation. However, this same complexity made them vulnerable to certain types of systemic failures that simpler organisms might easily overcome. Sarah remembered her basic xenobiology courses from Earth's university. Human medicine, while primitive compared to most galactic standards, had developed along different lines due to humanity's relatively fragile nature. Instead of relying on advanced technology, human healing often focused on supporting the body's natural recovery processes and addressing root causes rather than symptoms. As she watched the increasingly frantic efforts of the Zephyrian medical team, Sarah made a decision that would either save Prince Kyrion's life or end her own. She had seen enough human children recover from mysterious illnesses that had baffled doctors, often through simple interventions that addressed basic physiological needs. If there was even a chance that her primitive human knowledge could help where advanced Zephyrian science had failed, she had to try. The ventilation system provided her with a route into the healing chambers. Though using it would be an unprecedented breach of protocol, humans were considered little more than curiosities in the Zephyrian Empire, certainly not qualified to question the judgment of high healers. If she was wrong, she would face execution for her presumption. But as she looked at Kyrion's fading form through the grate, Sarah realized that some risks were worth taking. She began working at the grate's fastenings, her smaller fingers able to manipulate the ancient mechanisms that larger hands couldn't reach. Soon she would either prove that humanity's overlooked perspective had value, or she would join the prince in whatever fate awaited them both. The ventilation grate gave way with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the tense atmosphere of the healing chamber. Sarah held her breath, waiting for alarms or shouts of discovery, but the assembled Zephyrians were too focused on their failing patient to notice the subtle sound. She squeezed through the narrow opening, her human flexibility allowing her to navigate the tight space with surprising grace. Dropping silently into a shadowed alcove behind the massive healing apparatus, Sarah got her first clear view of Prince Kyrion. The sight nearly broke her heart. The vibrant young dragon she had come to love was barely recognizable. His breathing was so shallow that his chest barely moved, and his usual warm golden glow had been replaced by an alarming pallor that made his scales appear almost transparent. High Healer Nexus was directing a complex procedure involving harmonic resonance crystals, their purple light pulsing in patterns that should have stimulated cellular regeneration. Other healers monitored quantum field fluctuations and adjusted the molecular reconstruction matrix. Everything they were doing was technically perfect according to Zephyrian medical science, yet Kyrion continued to deteriorate. Emperor Valthek stood at his son's side, his massive frame trembling with barely contained emotion. The being who had single-handedly ended the Andromedian War was reduced to helpless watching as his child slipped away. His other children maintained respectful distances, their own grief carefully controlled in the presence of their father's raw anguish. "Perhaps we should consider a complete metabolic reset," suggested one of the junior healers, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we can suspend all biological functions temporarily and restart them systematically." "Too dangerous," Nexus replied sharply. "The prince's system is too unstable. Any major intervention could accelerate the deterioration." Sarah observed the debate with growing frustration. The Zephyrian approach was like trying to fix a delicate timepiece with a hammer. Sophisticated tools applied with insufficient understanding of the underlying problem. From her position in the shadows, she could see something the others had missed in their focus on advanced diagnostics. Kyrion's condition reminded her of cases she had studied during her xenobiology training. There was a particular syndrome that affected hybrid metabolisms, beings whose biological systems operated on multiple energy sources. Zephyrians could process both organic nutrients and stellar radiation, but this dual system occasionally created conflicts that traditional medicine couldn't address. The healing crystals were providing exactly the type of high-energy input that Kyrion's body would normally crave, but his system appeared to be rejecting it completely. Sarah suspected that his illness had triggered a protective mechanism that was now working against him. His body was essentially starving itself to prevent what it perceived as contamination. Moving carefully to avoid detection, Sarah studied the readings on the various monitoring devices. The quantum resonance patterns were indeed chaotic, but there was an underlying rhythm that suggested the prince's body was trying to communicate something. Human medical philosophy emphasized listening to what the patient's body was saying rather than simply imposing external Solutions. A memory surfaced from her childhood on Earth. Her younger brother had once become seriously ill with a mysterious condition that had baffled their local doctors. After days of complex treatments failed to improve his condition, their grandmother had suggested something radical. Stop all medications and simply provide basic supportive care. The doctors had protested, but desperation had made their parents willing to try anything. The simple approach had worked. Without the interference of multiple competing treatments, her brother's body had been able to fight off the illness naturally. The doctors had been amazed, but their grandmother had simply smiled and said that sometimes the cure was worse than the disease. Sarah realized that Prince Kyrian might be facing a similar situation. The advanced Zephyrian treatments, while well-intentioned, could be overwhelming his already stressed system. What he needed wasn't more energy input, but a chance for his body to recalibrate itself without external interference. The problem was convincing a room, full of the galaxy's most prestigious healers, that a human's primitive intuition might be correct where their advanced science had failed. Sarah knew that approaching them directly would result in immediate expulsion or worse. She needed a different strategy. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the shadows and walked calmly toward Prince Kyrian's bedside. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Security guards reached for their weapons while healers gasped in outrage at the unprecedented breach of protocol. Emperor Valthek's roar of fury shook the entire chamber, his protective instincts flaring at the perceived threat to his dying son. "How dare you enter these sacred chambers?" High Healer Nexus shrieked, her forearms gesturing frantically. "Guards, remove this insignificant creature immediately." Sarah raised her hands in a peaceful gesture, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around her. "Your Imperial Majesty, I believe I can help Prince Kyrian. Please just give me a moment to explain." The Emperor's eyes blazed with rage and disbelief. "You, a primitive human, thinks to succeed where our greatest minds have failed? Your arrogance is beyond comprehension." "Not arrogance, Your Majesty," Sarah replied steadily. "Different perspective. Sometimes the solution isn't more advanced technology but a simpler approach." The guards moved closer, their weapons charging with deadly energy, but something in Sarah's tone gave the Emperor pause. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in her voice or the fact that she had willingly walked into certain death to reach his son. Instead of ordering her immediate execution, he held up a massive claw to halt the guards. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself before I reduce you to atoms," Valthek growled, his voice promising terrible consequences. Sarah moved closer to Kyrian's bedside, ignoring the weapons trained on her. "Your Majesty, with respect, I think your healers are trying to force energy into Prince Kyrian's system, when his body is trying to reject all external input. On Earth, we call this metabolic shock. Sometimes the kindest thing is to remove all interventions and let the body heal itself." The chamber erupted in outraged protests from the medical staff. The suggestion that they should abandon treatment was not just medically unsound but personally insulting to beings who had dedicated their lives to healing arts. High Healer Nexus looked as though she might physically attack Sarah for the implied criticism, but Emperor Valthek noticed something that silenced his anger. For the first time since the crisis began, someone was speaking about his son with genuine understanding rather than clinical detachment. This small human creature was proposing to trust Kyrian's body to save itself, showing a faith in his son's strength that even his own people had lost. "Explain this metabolic shock," the Emperor commanded, his voice dangerous but no longer immediately murderous. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber as she prepared to stake her life on a theory that went against everything the Zephyrian medical establishment believed. The healing crystals continued their rhythmic pulsing, casting ethereal shadows across Kyrian's increasingly pale form. She had perhaps minutes to convince the most powerful being in the galaxy that sometimes less was more. "Your Imperial Majesty," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Prince Kyrian's body is essentially two different biological systems working together. He can process both organic nutrients like food and direct stellar energy like an adult Zephyrian. But right now those systems are fighting each other instead of cooperating." High Healer Nexus scoffed loudly. "Impossible. Zephyrian physiology has been studied for millennia. There is no conflict between metabolic pathways." "Not under normal circumstances," Sarah agreed, moving closer to the monitoring displays. "But look at these quantum resonance readings. The patterns aren't random. They're showing a feedback loop. His body is rejecting the crystal energy because it's trying to protect itself from what it perceives as an overload. Emperor Valthek's massive head turned toward the displays, his ancient eyes studying the data with new interest. "Continue," he commanded. Sarah pointed to specific wavelengths on the quantum scanner. "On Earth, we've seen similar patterns in humans who experience allergic shock. The body's defensive systems become so aggressive that they start attacking healthy tissue. The treatment isn't to force more energy into the system. It's to remove all stimulation and let the body reset itself." "This is absurd," protested one of the junior healers. "We cannot simply abandon medical intervention. The prince will die without support." "He's dying with support," Sarah replied quietly. "Your Imperial Majesty, I've watched Prince Kyrian for 3 years. His body is stronger than anyone gives him credit for. He's the only young Zephyrian I've seen who can consciously control both energy systems. What if his illness isn't weakness but his body trying to evolve?" The Emperor's eyes widened at this suggestion. The idea that his son might be undergoing some kind of biological advancement rather than deterioration had never occurred to anyone. It would explain why traditional treatments were failing. They were designed to treat illness, not adaptation. "Even if your theory has merit," High Healer Nexus interjected, "discontinuing treatment would be tantamount to murder. We cannot simply hope the prince survives without medical support." Sarah had anticipated this argument. "Not without support, with different support. Instead of trying to control his biology, we support it, maintain minimal life functions, regulate temperature, ensure adequate hydration, but remove all energy inputs and let his system stabilize naturally." The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the medical equipment and Kyrian's labored breathing. The concept was so fundamentally different from Zephyrian medical philosophy that it bordered on heretical. Their entire approach was based on imposing order through superior technology and knowledge. Emperor Valthek studied his son's pale form for long moments. "What success rate does this approach have among humans?" "In cases of true metabolic shock, about 70%, Sarah answered honestly. "But your Imperial Majesty, Prince Kyrian isn't human. His recovery rate could be much higher, because Zephyrian biology is naturally more resilient. Or much lower because we don't understand the fundamental differences," Nexus countered sharply. "This human's primitive medicine cannot possibly apply to our advanced physiology." Sarah felt her opportunity slipping away. The logical arguments weren't enough to overcome centuries of medical tradition and species pride. She needed to reach the Emperor not as a ruler but as a father desperate to save his child. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said softly, "I know what it's like to feel helpless when someone you love is suffering. My own brother almost died when I was young, and all the advanced medicine available couldn't save him. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is stop fighting and trust their child's strength." The Emperor's expression shifted, and for a moment, the ruler of 17 star systems looked like nothing more than a frightened father. "You would risk everything on this theory?" "I'm risking everything," Sarah replied. "If I'm wrong, I'll face execution for suggesting this course of action. But if I'm right and we continue with conventional treatment, Prince Kyrian will die anyway. What do we have to lose?" The medical staff exchanged horrified glances. The suggestion that their patient would die regardless of their efforts was the ultimate insult to their professional competence. Several started to voice protests, but Emperor Valthek silenced them with a gesture. "How long would this process take?" he asked. "Unknown," Sarah admitted. "If his body is truly resetting itself, it could take anywhere from hours to days. But we should see some indication within the first few hours whether the approach is working." High Healer Nexus stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "Your Imperial Majesty, I cannot recommend this course of action. The risk is unacceptable, and the theoretical foundation is based on primitive understanding of biology that predates our civilization by millennia." Emperor Valthek looked down at his son, then back at Sarah. "What exactly would you require to implement this treatment?" "First, discontinue all energy inputs. No crystal therapy, no plasma infusions, no molecular reconstruction. Second, maintain only basic life support, temperature regulation, hydration, breathing assistance if needed. Third, monitor his vital signs but don't intervene unless there's immediate danger of organ failure." The chamber erupted in protests from the medical staff. The suggestion that they should essentially stand by and watch was antithetical to everything they had been trained to do. Several healers began arguing simultaneously, their voices rising to near shouting levels. Emperor Valthek's roar silenced them instantly. Enough. If our methods were working, my son would be recovering. Instead, he grows weaker despite our efforts. He turned to Sarah with an expression that mixed desperation with grudging respect. Human, your proposal is either brilliant or suicidal. Perhaps both. Your Imperial Majesty, High Healer Nexus pleaded, surely you cannot seriously consider abandoning proven medical science for the theories of a species that still dies from diseases we eradicated millennia ago. The Emperor's gaze hardened. Those same theories apparently include recognizing when to stop interfering with natural processes. Something our proven medical science has not considered. Sarah realized this was the crucial moment. The Emperor was wavering between hope and fear, between trusting advanced technology and trusting his son's innate strength. She needed to give him one final reason to choose the path that could save Kyrion's life. Your Imperial Majesty, she said quietly, Prince Kyrion once told me that humans were interesting because we survived not by being the strongest or smartest, but by being adaptable. Maybe that's what he's trying to do right now, adapt to something new. The question is whether we're going to help him or get in his way. The Emperor's decision came with the finality of a neutron star's collapse. We implement the humans' protocol immediately. The medical staff reacted as if he had ordered them to set themselves on fire. High Healer Nexus stumbled backward, her forearms trembling with shock and outrage. Your Imperial Majesty, I must formally protest this decision. If Prince Kyrion dies, the responsibility will fall upon everyone who enabled this madness. If my son dies, Emperor Valthek replied with deadly calm, the responsibility will be mine alone. Begin shutdown procedures for all active treatments. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror as the healers reluctantly began deactivating their equipment. Each crystal that dimmed and every energy field that collapsed brought them closer to the point of no return. Once they committed to this path, Prince Kyrion's survival would depend entirely on his body's ability to heal itself. The process took nearly an hour, as the complex medical apparatus was carefully powered down. Zephyrian healing technology was so integrated that removing one component required adjustments to dozens of others. Throughout the procedure, Kyrion's vital signs remained dangerously weak but stable, neither improving nor deteriorating. Life support systems only, Sarah instructed as the last of the energy crystals went dark. Temperature maintenance, hydration monitoring, and respiratory assistance on standby, but not active unless his breathing becomes critically impaired. High Healer Nexus watched the proceedings with barely concealed horror. This is unprecedented in the history of Zephyrian medicine. We are essentially conducting an experiment on the Imperial heir with no established protocols or safety measures. Every medical breakthrough in history was unprecedented, Sarah replied quietly. The question is whether we're brave enough to trust what we don't fully understand. Emperor Valthek positioned himself at his son's bedside, his massive frame creating a protective presence around the small prince. How long before we know if this approach is working? Based on human physiology, we should see initial signs within 4 to 6 hours, Sarah explained. His body either begins to stabilize as the metabolic conflict resolves, or his condition deteriorates rapidly, without artificial support. The waiting began. In the silence left by the deactivated medical equipment, every small sound seemed magnified. Kyrion's breathing, barely audible before, became the focus of everyone's attention. Each shallow inhalation and exhalation was monitored with an intensity usually reserved for military campaigns. Sarah found herself studying the prince's face for any sign of change. Zephyrian children didn't sleep the way humans did, but they entered a meditative state that served similar restorative functions. If her theory was correct, Kyrion should naturally drift into this state as his body began repairing itself. 3 hours passed with agonizing slowness. The Emperor never moved from his position, his ancient eyes fixed on his son with unwavering attention. His other children had arrived and stood in respectful silence, their own worry carefully controlled. The medical staff maintained their monitoring stations but remained pointedly quiet about their disapproval. At the 4-hour mark, High Healer Nexus began making pointed observations about the lack of improvement. There has been no measurable change in the prince's condition. His cellular degradation continues at the same rate, and his quantum resonance patterns remain chaotic. Sarah bit back her initial response. She understood the healer's position. Watching a patient suffer without active intervention went against every instinct of someone trained to heal. But human medicine had taught her patience in ways that advanced Zephyrian technology hadn't needed to develop. The absence of deterioration is significant, Sarah pointed out. 4 hours ago, Prince Kirion was getting worse despite all your treatments. Now his condition is stable without any external support. That suggests his body is beginning to balance itself. Or it suggests that our treatments were the only thing preventing complete collapse, and we're now seeing a temporary plateau before final organ failure, Nexus replied sharply. Emperor Valthek's voice cut through their debate like a blade. I see a change. Everyone in the chamber immediately focused on Kirion. At first, Sarah couldn't detect what the Emperor had noticed. Then she saw it. The prince's breathing had deepened slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to be perceptible to someone who had been watching with parental intensity. His respiratory rate has decreased by 3%, confirmed one of the monitoring technicians, surprise evident in her voice. That's within normal variation, but it's the first positive change we've seen in days, Sarah finished. His body is starting to relax instead of fighting. Over the next hour, subtle improvements continued to manifest. Kirion's breathing became more regular, and some color began returning to his scales around his face and claws. The quantum resonance patterns on the monitors showed less chaotic fluctuation, suggesting that his dual energy systems were beginning to synchronize rather than conflict. High Healer Nexus studied the readings with growing bewilderment. These improvements are impossible according to established medical principles. Without energy input, his cellular structures should be deteriorating more rapidly, not stabilizing. Maybe that's the point, Sarah suggested. What if his body was rejecting energy input because it needed to restructure how it processes energy? Forcing fuel into an engine that's trying to rebuild itself would cause more damage. Emperor Valthek's expression showed the first hint of hope in days. Is my son going to recover? It's too early to be certain, Sarah replied honestly. But these changes suggest that his body is responding to the reduced stress. If this continues, he should begin showing more dramatic improvement. Over the next several hours, the atmosphere in the chamber began to shift as even the skeptical medical staff started to acknowledge that something significant was happening. The monitoring equipment, freed from the interference of active treatment systems, began detecting subtle biological changes that had been previously masked. Fascinating, muttered one of the junior healers. His metabolic pathways are restructuring themselves. I've never seen adaptive physiology operate at this level of sophistication. Sarah felt a surge of vindication mixed with profound relief. The gamble was paying off, but they weren't out of danger yet. Kirion's body was clearly working to heal itself, but the process remained delicate and unpredictable. What happens next? Asked Princess Zara, the Emperor's eldest daughter, speaking for the first time since the crisis began. We continue to wait and watch, Sarah explained. His body is doing the work now. Our job is to support the process without interfering. If I'm right about what's happening, Prince Kirion isn't just recovering, he's evolving. Emperor Valthek turned to face Sarah directly, his massive form no longer radiating threat but something approaching respect. Human, if my son survives this ordeal, you will have accomplished something that our greatest minds declared impossible. With respect. Your Imperial Majesty, Sarah replied. I haven't accomplished anything. Prince Kirion's own strength is saving him. I just suggested we get out of his way and let him do it. As the 6th hour approached, Kirion's improvements became undeniable. His breathing was strong and regular. His color had improved dramatically, and the quantum resonance patterns showed increasing harmony between his dual energy systems. Most importantly, he appeared to be entering the deep meditative state that would allow his body to complete whatever transformation was taking place. The revolution in Zephyrian medical thinking had begun with a human caretaker's simple suggestion to trust the patient's own healing wisdom. 12 hours after the implementation of Sarah's protocol, Prince Kirion's eyes opened for the first time in 4 days. The moment was so unexpected that even the vigilant monitoring staff nearly missed it. 1 second the young prince appeared to be in deep meditative stasis, and the next his bright golden eyes were focusing on the faces surrounding his bed. Father, Kirion's voice was weak but clear, carrying none of the labored quality that had marked his breathing during the crisis. Why does everyone look so worried? Emperor Valthek's roar of joy shook the entire palace. The sound carried such relief and triumph that servants throughout the complex stopped their work to listen and wonder. The emperor, who had maintained rigid composure throughout the ordeal, finally allowed his emotions to overflow as he gently embraced his son. "My brave boy," Valthek whispered, his voice thick with emotions that few beings in the galaxy had ever witnessed. "You gave us quite a scare." High Healer Nexus approached the bed with her diagnostic crystals, her earlier skepticism replaced by scientific fascination. "Prince Kyrian, how do you feel? Any pain or discomfort?" The young prince considered the question thoughtfully. "I feel different, stronger somehow, but also more balanced. Like two parts of me that were fighting have learned to work together." He noticed Sarah standing quietly near the monitoring station. "Sarah, you're here. Did you bring me any new stories from Earth?" Sarah laughed through tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "I have lots of stories for you, Your Highness, but first let's make sure you're completely recovered." The medical examinations that followed revealed changes that revolutionized Zephyrian understanding of their own biology. Prince Kyrian's energy processing systems had indeed undergone a fundamental restructuring. Instead of operating as separate metabolic pathways that occasionally interfered with each other, his body had developed an integrated system that could seamlessly switch between or combine organic and stellar energy sources. "Remarkable," breathed one of the research healers. "His cellular structure shows adaptations that should have taken thousands of years of evolution to develop. It's as if his body compressed an entire evolutionary leap into a few days of intensive biological reconstruction." Emperor Valthek listened to these explanations with growing amazement. "Are you saying my son has become something new?" "Not something new," Sarah interjected gently. "Something better." Prince Kyrian was always unique in his ability to consciously control both energy systems. What happened was, his body finally found a way to integrate them fully. He's still completely Zephyrian, just optimized. High Healer Nexus was studying the quantum resonance patterns with obvious fascination. The harmony between his metabolic pathways is unprecedented. This level of biological integration should theoretically allow him to operate in environments that would challenge even adult Zephyrians. "Does this mean I can finally visit the ice moons?" Kyrian asked eagerly, sitting up in bed with energy that amazed everyone present. "I've always wanted to see the crystal forests, but you said I wasn't old enough to handle the energy drain." Emperor Valthek laughed, a sound of pure joy that transformed his fearsome features. "My son, after this experience, I believe you can handle anything." Over the following days, the implications of Kyrian's transformation became clear. The young prince demonstrated abilities that surpassed those of adult Zephyrians in many areas. His energy efficiency was remarkable. He could operate at full capacity for extended periods without the usual metabolic stress that affected his species. More importantly, he showed an unprecedented ability to adapt to different environmental conditions by adjusting his energy processing in real time. The medical establishment struggled to understand how Sarah's seemingly primitive approach had succeeded where their advanced techniques had failed. The answer, when it finally emerged, challenged fundamental assumptions about healing and biological intervention. "We were treating the symptoms instead of supporting the underlying process," High Healer Nexus admitted during a formal review of the case. "Our advanced techniques, while individually beneficial, were creating interference that prevented the prince's body from completing its natural adaptation." Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of addressing the Imperial Medical Council. Standing before the greatest healers in the galaxy, she felt the weight of history being made. "In human medicine, we have a principle called first, do no harm. Sometimes the most effective intervention is to remove barriers to healing, rather than imposing external solutions. But how did you recognize what was happening when our most sophisticated diagnostic equipment missed it?" asked the chief medical advisor. "I didn't have sophisticated equipment to rely on," Sarah explained. "I had to observe Prince Kyrian as a whole being rather than as a collection of systems. His behavior, his responses, the way his body was trying to communicate what it needed, these things aren't always visible on quantum scanners." Emperor Valthek, who had insisted on attending the review personally, listened to these discussions with growing respect for human medical philosophy. Are you suggesting that your species' limitations led to better insight? Not limitations, Your Imperial Majesty, different strengths. Humans had to develop medical intuition because we didn't have advanced technology to rely on. We learned to trust what we could observe and feel, rather than just what we could measure. The conversation was interrupted by Prince Kyrian himself, who had been granted permission to attend the latter part of the review. His recovery had been so complete that he showed no residual effects from his ordeal, and his new metabolic integration had given him an energy and vitality that impressed everyone who encountered him. "Sarah," he said, approaching her with the enthusiasm that had always characterized their friendship, "I wanted to thank you for trusting me to heal myself. I could sense what my body was trying to do, but everyone else was too worried to listen." His words created a profound silence in the chamber. The idea that the patient himself had been aware of the healing process but unable to communicate it effectively challenged another fundamental assumption of Zephyrian medical practice. "You knew what was happening to you?" High Healer Nexus asked in astonishment. "Not exactly," Kyrian replied thoughtfully, "but I could feel my body working on something important. All the energy you were giving me felt wrong, like trying to eat when you're already full." Sarah was the first person who suggested that maybe I should stop eating and let my stomach settle. Emperor Valthek placed a gentle claw on his son's shoulder. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "I tried," Kyrian said simply, "but everyone was so focused on fixing me that they didn't have time to listen to what I was feeling." The implications of this revelation rippled through the medical establishment. If patients could provide insight into their own healing processes, but medical protocols didn't include mechanisms for receiving that input, then countless opportunities for better treatment might be missed. Sarah watched the assembled healers grapple with these new concepts and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not because she had saved Prince Kyrian's life, his own body had done that, but because she had helped bridge the gap between two very different approaches to healing. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said, addressing Emperor Valthek, "perhaps the real lesson here isn't about human versus Zephyrian medicine. Maybe it's about combining the best of both approaches. Advanced technology guided by intuitive understanding, sophisticated analysis balanced with patient observation." The Emperor nodded slowly. "You speak wisdom, human. Perhaps it is time for the Zephyrian Empire to learn from those we have overlooked." 3 months after Prince Kyrian's recovery, the Zephyrian Empire initiated the most comprehensive medical reform in its history. The transformation began with a formal decree from Emperor Valthek establishing the Institute for Integrated Healing, with Sarah Chen appointed as its first Director of Human Medical Liaison. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the galactic medical community. "The decision to elevate a human to such a position is unprecedented," reported the Galactic Medical Journal. For millennia, the Zephyrian Empire has maintained the most advanced medical technology in known space. This dramatic shift toward incorporating primitive, human healing philosophies represents either revolutionary progress or dangerous regression. Sarah found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond medical practice. Her new position required her to work directly with the Empire's most brilliant minds, translating human intuitive approaches into frameworks that advanced Zephyrian science could understand and apply. The challenge was immense, but the potential impact was revolutionary. "The key is finding common ground," Sarah explained to a gathering of senior healers at the Institute's inaugural meeting. "Human medicine emphasizes observation and patience because we had to understand our limitations. Zephyrian medicine emphasizes intervention and control because you had the technology to make it work. We need to combine both approaches." High Healer Nexus, who had become one of Sarah's most valuable collaborators despite their rocky beginning, presented the first results of their integrated protocols. "We have applied human observational techniques to 17 cases that were previously considered untreatable. By spending time listening to patients and observing behavioral patterns rather than relying solely on quantum diagnostics, we achieved successful outcomes in 14 cases. The success rate was remarkable, but even more significant were the changes in how Zephyrian healers approached their patients. The rigid hierarchies that had characterized medical practice for millennia began to soften as practitioners learned to value patient input alongside technological analysis. Prince Kyrian had become an unofficial ambassador for the new approach, often visiting the institute to share his experience with other patients. His transformation had stabilized into something extraordinary. He possessed abilities that surpassed those of most adult Zephyrians while maintaining the curiosity and compassion that had always defined his character. The integration isn't just physical, he explained to a group of young healers who were studying his case. When my body learned to balance its energy systems, it changed how I think and feel too. I can sense things about other beings that I never noticed before. Sarah says this is similar to what humans call empathy, but stronger. This enhanced empathic ability had proven invaluable in medical applications. Kyrian could often detect illness or distress in others before any technological scanner registered abnormalities. His insights had led to early interventions that prevented several medical crises among the palace staff. Emperor Valtek observed these developments with growing satisfaction and concern. The medical advances were undeniable, but they were having broader implications for Zephyrian society. The traditional emphasis on technological superiority was being challenged by evidence that other species possessed valuable knowledge and perspectives, my lord advised his chief counselor during a private meeting. Some of the nobility are expressing concern about this elevation of human influence. They worry that acknowledging the value of primitive approaches undermines our cultural superiority. The emperor's expression hardened. Any who question the value of approaches that saved my son's life are welcome to explain their position directly to me, preferably while standing in the same chamber where our superior technology failed completely. Meanwhile, Sarah was discovering that her role extended far beyond medicine. Human approaches to problem-solving, conflict resolution, and social organization were generating interest throughout the empire's administrative structure. The same observational skills and patient analysis that had saved Kyrion's life were proving applicable to diplomatic negotiations, resource management, and even military strategy. Humans have an interesting approach to complexity, observed General Thrakus, the Empire's chief military strategist, during a consultation about a rebellion in the outer territories. Rather than overwhelming opposition with superior force, they seem to prefer understanding the underlying motivations and addressing root causes. Sarah found herself mediating a conflict that had been raging for 2 years on the mining world of Zerion 4. Traditional Zephyrian approaches had focused on military suppression and technological solutions. When those failed, she suggested something radical, actually, talking to the rebels to understand their grievances. The miners aren't rebelling against the Empire, she reported after spending 2 weeks on Zerion 4. They're protesting working conditions that would be deadly to most species. The Zephyrian administrators assumed that everyone could handle the same environmental stresses that don't affect your people. The solution was embarrassingly simple once the real problem was identified. Improved environmental controls and safety protocols ended the rebellion within weeks. More importantly, the incident led to a comprehensive review of imperial policies regarding non-Zephyrian populations. Back on Draconis Prime, Prince Kyrian was experiencing his own expansion of influence. His unique combination of enhanced Zephyrian abilities and human influence perspective made him an ideal intermediary between different species within the Empire. He began accompanying diplomatic missions, often providing insights that proved crucial to successful negotiations. The Andromedians aren't being stubborn about the trade agreements, he reported after a particularly difficult negotiation. They're confused because our proposals don't account for their reproduction cycle. They need resources at different times than we assumed. These successes were reshaping how the Zephyrian Empire interacted with its subject species and allies. The traditional model of benevolent but distant rule was evolving into something more collaborative and responsive. Other galactic powers began taking notice of the changes. The Zephyrian Empire's recent diplomatic successes are noteworthy, reported the Galactic Council's intelligence summary. Their new approach to interspecies relations has resolved several long-standing conflicts and improved trade relationships throughout their territory. The common factor appears to be increased consultation with affected populations and attention to species-specific needs. However, not everyone within the Empire welcomed these changes. A faction of traditionalist nobles, led by Archduke Vorthak, began organizing resistance to what they termed the human contamination of Zephyrian purity. We are the inheritors of the most advanced civilization in galactic history, Vorthak declared during a closed meeting of conservative nobles. To subordinate our judgment to the primitive intuitions of an inferior species is not just politically dangerous but culturally destructive. The growing tension between progressives and traditionalists came to a head when Archduke Vorthak formally petitioned the Imperial Council to review Sarah's appointment and the medical reforms. The petition carried significant political weight, as Vorthak controlled several key star systems and commanded considerable military resources. Emperor Valthek found himself facing the most serious internal challenge to his authority since ascending the throne. The question was no longer simply about medical practice or even human influence. It had become a fundamental debate about the future direction of Zephyrian civilization. "Father," Prince Kyrian said during a private conversation, "I know this controversy is my fault. If I hadn't gotten sick, none of this would have happened." The Emperor placed a gentle claw on his son's shoulder. "My boy, what happened to you didn't create this conflict, it revealed it. The choice we face now is whether we remain isolated in our assumed superiority or open ourselves to learning from others. Sarah and her people have shown us that strength can come from cooperation, not just domination." The upcoming Imperial Council session would determine whether the Empire continued its evolution toward integration and cooperation, or retreated into the traditional isolation that had defined Zephyrian culture for millennia. The stakes extended far beyond the fate of one human woman or even one empire. They would shape the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The Imperial Council convened in the Great Assembly Hall, a massive crystalline dome that had witnessed the most significant moments in Zephyrian history. Representatives from across the Empire gathered to witness what many considered a defining moment for their civilization. Archduke Vorthak's challenge to the human integration policies had attracted attention from every major faction within the Empire. Sarah stood before the assembled council, acutely aware that she represented not just her own fate, but the future of human Zephyrian cooperation. Beside her, Prince Kyrian provided a living testament to the success of integrated approaches, his presence radiating the enhanced vitality and wisdom that had emerged from his transformation. Honored counselors, Archduke Vorthak began his presentation, his massive form commanding attention. "We gather today to address a dangerous departure from the principles that have made our empire great. The elevation of primitive, human methods over proven Zephyrian science threatens to undermine the technological superiority that ensures our security and prosperity." His arguments were compelling and rooted in centuries of imperial tradition. The Zephyrian Empire had indeed achieved dominance through technological advancement and cultural confidence. The suggestion that they needed to learn from lesser species challenged fundamental assumptions about their place in the galaxy. "Consider the implications," Vorthak continued, his voice carrying the weight of aristocratic authority. "If we accept that human intuition is superior to Zephyrian analysis, what prevents other species from claiming their primitive methods deserve equal consideration? Where does such accommodation end?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the assembly. Sarah felt the weight of opposition but remained calm, remembering Prince Kyrian's words about trusting in strength rather than forcing outcomes. Emperor Valthek allowed Vorthak to complete his presentation before responding. "Archduke, your concerns about maintaining our empire's strength are noted and appreciated. However, I would ask you to consider what true strength means." The Emperor's voice carried across the vast chamber with casual authority. "Strength that cannot adapt is brittleness. Power that cannot learn is stagnation. The question before us is not whether we should abandon our achievements, but whether we should enhance them with wisdom, drawn from every available source." High Healer Nexus rose to present the medical evidence. Honored counselors, in the 3 months since implementing integrated protocols, our treatment success rates have improved by 37%. We have solved medical mysteries that had puzzled our finest minds for decades. This is not abandonment of Zephyrian science, but enhancement of it. Anecdotal successes do not justify systemic change, Vorthak replied sharply. A few positive outcomes do not outweigh the risk of corrupting our established methods with unproven alternatives. It was Prince Kyrian who provided the response that shifted the debate's trajectory. Standing with the poise that had always marked his character but now enhanced by his transformation, he addressed the assembly directly. "Honored counselors, With respect to Archduke Vorthak, I believe he misunderstands what integration means. Sarah didn't replace Zephyrian medicine with human medicine. She helped our healers see what they were missing. The strength of our technology combined with the wisdom of observation created something better than either approach alone. The young prince's words carried unexpected weight. His enhanced abilities were visible to everyone present. The way he moved with perfect energy efficiency, the clarity of his speech, the evident harmony between his physical and mental capabilities. He was proof that integration enhanced rather than diminished Zephyrian potential. Moreover, Kyrian continued, this debate assumes that learning from others weakens us, but I have found the opposite to be true. Understanding human perspectives has made me more Zephyrian, not less. I appreciate our strengths more because I understand how rare and valuable they are. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Honored counselors, I have never suggested that human methods are superior to Zephyrian science. What I have learned is that different perspectives can reveal blind spots that even the most advanced technology might miss. She gestured to the monitoring displays that showed real-time data from across the empire. The success we have achieved in medicine, diplomacy, and resource management comes from combining the best of both approaches. Zephyrian technology provides the tools. Human observation provides the insight to use them most effectively. The debate continued for hours as counselors from various systems presented their positions. Some supported the integration policies based on demonstrated results, while others sided with Vorthak's concerns about cultural integrity and strategic security. The turning point came when Admiral Zephys, commander of the Third Fleet, provided an unexpected perspective. Honored counselors, I have spent my career fighting threats to our empire. The greatest danger I have observed is not from external enemies, but from our own inability to adapt to changing circumstances. Her statement carried particular weight because Admiral Zephys was known for her traditional views and military conservatism. The human integration policies have not weakened our forces. They have provided new tools for understanding our enemies and allies alike. Our recent diplomatic successes have strengthened our strategic position more effectively than any military campaign. As the discussion drew toward its conclusion, Emperor Valthek made his position clear. This council will decide whether the Zephyrian Empire faces the future with confidence in our ability to grow and adapt, or retreats into isolation based on fear of change. The vote was closer than many had expected, but the integration policies were confirmed by a substantial majority. More importantly, the debate had clarified the empire's new direction, one that embraced cooperation and learning while maintaining Zephyrian strength and identity. In the months that followed, the effects of this decision rippled throughout the galaxy. Other major powers began reassessing their own approaches to interspecies relations. The Andromedian Confederation established its own integration programs, while even the isolationist Quantum Collective began limited cultural exchange initiatives. Sarah found her role expanding again, as she became the Director of Interspecies Understanding, working to facilitate cooperation between various galactic civilizations. Her approach, patient observation, empathetic listening, and collaborative problem-solving, provided a model that other species could adapt to their own circumstances. Prince Kyrian continued to develop his unique abilities, becoming a bridge between species that had previously found cooperation difficult. His combination of enhanced Zephyrian capabilities and human-influenced wisdom made him an ideal ambassador for the new galactic order that was slowly emerging. The most remarkable thing, Kyrian observed during a conversation with Sarah 2 years after his recovery, is how saving my life ended up changing how entire civilizations interact with each other. Sarah smiled, watching as the young prince effortlessly mediated a dispute between Andromedian traders and Zephyrian administrators. Maybe that's what humans are really good at, finding connections that others miss. Not because we're superior, but because we're different enough to see things from new angles. The transformation that began with one human caretaker's refusal to accept conventional wisdom had evolved into a galactic revolution in cooperation and understanding. Species that had maintained careful distances for millennia began working together on challenges that affected them all. Years later, historians would mark Prince Kyrian's illness as the moment when the galaxy began its transition from an age of isolated civilizations to an era of integrated cooperation. Sarah Chen, the human who had dared to challenge an empire's medical establishment, became a symbol of the courage required to bridge the gaps between different peoples. But perhaps the most important legacy was the principle that had guided Sarah from the beginning. Sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing when to trust others to save themselves. In a galaxy where power had always meant domination, the Zephyrian Empire had discovered that true leadership meant creating space for everyone to contribute their unique gifts to the common good. The Dragon Emperor's ailing child had indeed been overlooked, not by his family, but by a medical establishment that had forgotten to listen. When a human caretaker rushed him to aid, she brought not just different medicine, but a different way of seeing. That difference had transformed not just one life, but the future of galactic civilization itself.